This interview was recorded on February 19th, 2021. Hi, I'm Len Epp from Lean Pub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Stephen Godfrey. Based in Linden, Utah, Stephen is a senior DevOps engineer at Omadi, a Utah-based startup that works on technology supporting the tow service industry. You can check out his courses on freelance consulting at freelancecollege.com and see his web design and development work at mountainfreshmedia.com. Stephen is the author of the Lean Pub book, Imposter Therapy: How to Overcome Imposter Syndrome and Start Living. In the book, using stories from his own and other people's lives, Stephen teaches readers how they can try to overcome imposter syndrome, which can be defined a number of different ways, but can be described as the surprisingly common feeling that you're regarded as a person with qualities or accomplishments you don't believe you actually possess. In this interview, we're going to talk about Stephen's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience using Lean Pub to self-publish. So thank you, Stephen, very much for being on the Front Matter podcast.
Thank you, Len. I'm glad to be here.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and the circuitous path you took to a career in web development and DevOps.
Well, how long do we want to go on this podcast? As for origin stories, I don't have anything amazing like joining the Avengers or whatnot, but my origin story is pretty interesting. I grew up in Canada, in Sherwood Park, Alberta, Canada, which is just east of Edmonton. So picture this, it's winter, it's 5:30 in the morning, delivering newspapers. It's so cold that your eyelids freeze shut. You have to wear 2 pairs of socks, leather parka, everything. And that's how I grew up. I grew up in Edmonton, where the summers are sunny but not warm, and the winters are cold as cold can be. Not as cold as Alaska, but it's still pretty cold. And then as for origin story, grew up like a normal kid, and then did a 2-year stint, a service stint as a missionary over in Australia, which was awesome. Got to ride go through Alice Springs. I lived down South Australia, also lived in North Australia. So that whole gamut from south to north, and then came back and did school. Went down to college in Salt Lake City. So I'm from Canada, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, but got a chance to go down to the States. And I wanted to go to BYU just because they had a good program in information systems and just because it's where I felt I should go. So it was kind of a circuitous route. I think of our listeners, not everyone here has finished college, or they started and they didn't finish, or they took longer than they wanted. And that's the thing in imposter syndrome, or even just life. I think we set this unlofty expectation, this goal that we should hit this goal by a certain date. You should be married by this date. You should have gotten this salary by this date. You should have finished by this date. And I didn't. I was 27 when I finished my bachelor's degree in information systems. And the circuitous route was basically, I had a really bad relationship experience where it just knocked me to my knees partway through BYU. And so I was starting to fail classes. I mean, I took calculus 3 times and finally trying to figure out life. And so I took a break to go back to Northern Canada. So picture this, if I'm from Northern Canada and, Alberta, and then I go to a place called Fort McMurray, which is about 4.5 hours north. So it's even colder, even darker in the winter, but I trucked. I was a trucker for a while, did garbage truck, freight truck, hauling things. Seeing the Northern Lights up there was just phenomenal. One night was a hot shot trip up to the plant sites. And I saw the whole sky from a good at least 180 degrees of my vision. I could just see from left to right, the skies danced and the gods battled. And it was just poetic and beautiful. And I had to stop my truck because I would have crashed it because it was just so impressive. But lived up there for a while, did some trucking, got to go back to BYU. My goal was I wasn't going to date. I wasn't going to get married. And then I got married, which I'm grateful for. But it was good. It's good. It's been a good marriage. We've been married 12 years now, and we're still happily married. We have 2 kids, Eliana and Finn, 9 and 7, and we live in Linden, Utah. I've got a house. We've got a cat, which is nice. That was a new addition to the family last year, and it just showed up on our property, so we took it in. So for origin story, that's kind of like my upbringing, growth, that kind of thing in a nutshell. But work-wise, I took a break from BYU after I graduated. And then I was so burnt out from school. I was just done. I was just tired and worn out. And so I took a job during the Great Recession. And it was this is kind of interesting because we want to talk about the pandemic and COVID-19 and how I had to get any job I could during the Great Recession of 2009. So I was doing upper level tech support for a company fresh out of college, and then got a chance to go work for a company doing web development and reporting and analytics, that kind of thing, handling the reports. I processed payroll for a whole bunch of teachers. And so I did that for, I know, a good, year or so. And then there was some company politics. Half the company got let go, at least the provo end of that. And that was during my master's program. And I was going back to BYU to get the master's degree. And so I worked for a startup. They ran out of money. Everyone got fired. I started looking for work. And then the interesting thing is that it's not what I wanted to do. And somebody called me up and said, hey, we've got this project. I want it scoped. Can you scope it out? I'm like, yeah, I can scope it out. And so I've done contract work before, but never really freelancing. And so that was my first real freelance gig. And I scoped it out. I got a check in hand. I thought, well, fetch, I really have to deliver because I'm paid for this. So I did, scoped it out, and I did work for that client for a year and a half. And then I gained more clients and more clients. That was for a self-storage company. And then I got a client doing work for a bank, and then for a financial tech institution, then for a management consultant, then accountants, optometrists, a whole bunch of things, building websites, which you can see on mountainfreshmedia.com. But I just did freelancing for a good 5 solid years and did pretty well, really successful. We're talking 6 figures towards the end. And then dun, 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 COVID-19 hit. And I'll be honest that I had a string of just unaccepted, projects or contracts or things like that. I didn't have the systems I do now, or at least the knowledge of how to get leads and sales I do now. In fact, I'm writing a book on how to find freelance clients. It's just very infancy, but that's my next project on the docket. And so, yeah, I was running out of cash. I had this huge runway of $50,000 saved up for my freelancing, and I was starting to burn through that. I'm like, I need to get a job. So I got a job doing DevOps, and I've always wanted to get into DevOps just to know, could I do it? And I've been working there for, good 8 months now. And I'm a senior DevOps engineer at Amani, and I can do it, which is kind of cool because I have definitely suffered with imposter syndrome and wondering, like, am I good enough? Do I belong? Do I deserve here? And it's been really good to have that achievement and know, like, yeah, I can toe the line. I can fix things. I can handle it when the fire is going on and make things work. And so, yeah. In the meantime, I freelance on the side. I've got a project I'm delivering this Monday that's 7K, so 7,000 US, and life is good. Full-time job, stable marriage, kids, kids are kids, right? But they're pretty good. And then life is good. No complaints.
Yeah. Thanks very much for sharing all that. We were chatting a little bit before the interview, and I mentioned to Stephen that I'm from next door originally to Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
So I've had my own, I've had my own version of many of the experiences you described of, seeing the Northern Lights, seeing the whole sky, because, the joke is that the land is so flat that if your dog runs away, you'll still see where it is after 3 days.
Yep.
Particularly the nighttime sky is an amazing thing in the remote north. I say remote, in the north. And yes, the winters, when I lived in the UK for a few years, and I'm sure you probably had a version of this in Australia, but telling people that, like, where I grew up in winter, it was a normal thing for the weather report on the radio to say how long it's going to take for your skin to freeze. Where we grew up, that's just like part of the weather report. Yep. But in other places, it sounds totally horrifying.
Well, it's funny when we say north. I mean, it's all relative, right? If you talk to somebody who's from Minnesota, Minnesota would be on the same level as, Saskatoon or whatnot, Regina, Edmonton, that kind of level. But then you talk to somebody who's a Canadian, it's like, well, are you from Tuktoyaktuk or Inuvik or Northwest? Well, not Northwest Territories anymore, but the Yukon, they think that's far north. But if you talk to somebody from Texas and say you're from Edmonton or you're from, Winnipeg or something, they think that's far north. And so it's interesting that you and I both canoed up in northern Saskatchewan, the land of 1,000 lakes, they call it. And it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous area where you're in the middle of nowhere, from like literally middle of nowhere. And yeah, did a 10-day trip up there, same place where you canoed. So that's kind of an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that this is a total coincidence. But when I was actually on a 3 or 4 day canoe trip up there with the high school I was at, we ran into another group of teenagers canoeing who were from my old high school. Like they were my class.
Up there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's strange. But
that's like saying that you went to Antarctica with a bunch of your friends and you ran into your old high school friends down. Like that's just totally random.
Yeah, it was wild. Yeah. But these kinds of coincidences do happen sometimes. And yeah, it's a beautiful country if you ever get a chance to go there. And if you're willing to brave the winter, it actually is. It's bracing at first, but if you dress well and you ask for some advice, you might even enjoy it after a while. Yep. I wanted to ask you, so you said you were in Australia for 2 years on a mission. I'm assuming, given the university you went to, that this was probably a Mormon mission.
Yeah, guilty. We don't really use the term Mormon anymore, but it's fine.
Would you say LDS?
Yeah, LDS is fine. Yeah, it's not offensive. It just, so I was the guy with I mean, I don't know if some reader is going to be some like hate thing, like, I'm just going to turn this off right now. Click. Oh my gosh. But I mean, I've got some stories to tell. So, but yeah, I did a service mission as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints over in Australia. And it was good. A lot of service work, a lot of serving in libraries and Meals on Wheels and helping poor people and teaching and working with the Aborigines. It was just a really fantastic experience because, well, there's a couple of things. One, in Adelaide where we were, it was the hottest summer in 100 years. I think there was 30 days straight where it was 40 degrees plus Celsius, of course. So that'd be 110 degrees Fahrenheit plus ish. And it was hot. And there's a story where, this is funny. So we're up in Darwin in Northern Territory, and we're going to go for a crocodile tour. And they have it where they take these big hunk of meat and they tie it to a string and they tie that to a rope and that's tied to a stick. And so they will drip that in the water and the crocodiles will come out just like Peter Pan, like do, 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 do. And you see them just come out and they will literally leap out of their water. You know, we're talking 8-10 feet up in the air. Sometimes they can clear the water because they have that huge tail and they can actually grab the meat, rip it off the line and chew it. And so, but yeah, we're waiting for a croc tour. And there was a guy who says, hey, see that green tree snake? You should grab it. And I was scared. And so like, I kind of half hesitantly reached for the middle of the snake and, slowly, and it turned and it bit me. I looked at my hand and there was just these white scratches on it. I didn't even break the skin really. And so like, I can do this. So I grabbed the snake, pulled it down, put my hand behind its head so it can try and bite me. And that was kind of cool to have that confidence where I used to always be scared of snakes as a kid. And like, no, I can do it. I can catch snakes. Now I catch snakes all the time. But that was funny because when I let the snake go, there was a bunch of girls around and let it on the ground and it went right towards them and they freaked out and shrieked and jumped on the chair, just like out of a movie kind of thing. And it was a good memory. So a lot of good experience over in Australia. Great people, loved it. And it was good experience. Yeah.
Regarding people turning off the podcast, I've actually interviewed at least 1 or 2 people who've gone on Mormon missions, LDS missions and talked about it before. In fact, one person I interviewed actually worked on the development of the system for like candidate selection and assignment. So this subject has come up before, specifically in the context of the concept of imposter syndrome. I wanted to ask you. So, I mean, I've often wondered this when I've seen, people on their mission, and encountered them. And I hope that's the right term to use. But how did you feel when you, as it were, knocked on your first door?
I think it's the same as if you have any like first day in the job, first date with a girl. I guess not with the first date with a girl, but first day in a job, first day doing anything in position where you're unfamiliar, you're scared as heck. Like you're totally scared as can be. And it's unfamiliar and you think you're not good enough. And what am I doing here? Like all of those questions go through every missionary's mind ever. And they went through my mind for sure. Like, what am I doing here? Is this right? Am I crazy? What's my purpose? Is this what I want to do with my life? Am I good enough? Am I clean enough? Am I worthy enough? All those questions go through your mind. And I think with life, you knock on the door, metaphorically and literally speaking, but you just do knock on the door and you just take it and you take each moment at a time, in 12-step And I've done that. I go to a 12-step group just for maintenance and whatnot and accountability. It's been really good, a good place of healing and just kind of a accountability where they say, you take each step at a time, each moment at a time. And sometimes you think, well, is the year too much? Is 2020 too much? Well, take each month at a time. Is each month too much? Take each week. What about each day, each moment? And moment by moment, that's what we are. You think about breathing. Each time you take a breath, you're literally resetting your death clock, because if you don't breathe for 2 minutes, you're going to die. And I think when you can accept that and just realize that we're here on this earth just to grow and progress and find meaning, help others, do the best we can, and then go on to whatever happens after this. You take each moment by moment and you live your life, and all that worrying and the fear, you live with it and you work through it, and it all works out.
Yeah, and actually, that's really interesting, particularly about how things can work out. So you mentioned that you sort of you started studies maybe a little late, you had a little bit of an interruption and finished a little bit later than people might have otherwise. And I've got a question that I wanted to ask you I just building up that context that I often ask people on this podcast if they're in tech, which is, if you were starting out now, like in 2021, with the intention of having a career like the one you've had, would you actually get one or more formal university degrees before starting out? No.
Oh, no. So I have a lot of respect for education, for professors. I've been a professor. I actually was able to be an adjunct professor at BYU teaching undergrads. Picture this, 350 undergrads, teaching them Microsoft Excel and be like, Professor Godfrey, I have a question about my life. What should I do for my major? What should I do for this class? Who should I date? all these questions. Like, I'm just a graduate student, like, hold the phone. And I have full respect for it, but I also think that there's a kind of like How to Train Your Dragon 3, so to speak, like a hidden world where let me go back. There is this paradigm where we all think that you're supposed to go to school and you're supposed to get your degree and go work for a big company in information systems. It would be KPMG or PricewaterhouseCoopers or Accenture or any of these kind of, management consultant auditing type firms. And then you go get your degree and you put your time in, and then you finally get a move up the chain, and maybe you go get another master's degree or whatnot. And then you have to get a degree to succeed. In some cases, the formal way, yes. I mean, that is true. When they look for applicants, then they want somebody who has that kind of experience and that piece of paper. But what you're doing when you go to school is learning how to learn. You're getting the network, and you're basically getting the confidence to go and do things. You're getting this exposure for this project and this project. I'm going to say something bold. You don't need an education. If you've got hustle, you might need education if you want to work for a big company that has these rigidized processes. But if you want to go make money and take care of your life, you don't need it. Freelance, you just need to know how to write or code or design, and you need to have the confidence to pitch and the know how to run a business, which you can get just by getting experience. But I think having that degree is good for a lot of people because they feel that they aren't good enough because, I missed one class in my degree, and because of that, then 5 years went past and it expired. I know people who did that, where they went to school for, 4 years minus one class, and it's a waste, not a waste, but they don't have that piece of paper, but it gives them that confidence. It can make hiring easier. It can make finding a job easier, but you don't have to have it. If you have solid experience, it can help. But yeah, there's arguments for both sides. But yeah,
thanks very much for sharing that. And yeah.
I mean, I'd like to go back and teach at BYU again. I don't need to have a PhD for that, but I could go get one. I've got a couple of published papers, not to be like, look at me, I'm so fancy. They're literally just, conference papers and whatnot. But it's not where I want to go. I'd rather have the experience. I'd rather build products, inventions, write books, and showcase my skill set that way, instead of saying, I went to school and I can take these courses, because I can take courses without going to school, and I can have them be more applicable to my life than just a school course that's, 3 to 5 years out of date.
Thanks very much for that really great answer. Just before we move on to the next part of the interview where we talk about your book, I wanted to ask you mentioned a little bit about how the pandemic has affected your professional life, but I just wanted to get if you could give us a little bit of a picture of just the life around you where you live in Utah. Did people start wearing masks right away? Did they not start wearing masks at all?
Oh man.
Did all the restaurants shut down, that kind of thing?
This is my official on microphone sigh. wear a bleepity bleep mask. I mean, yeah, there's all the conspiracy theories, and there's all these people saying you don't need to, and people saying that, tuberculosis is just as infective and whatnot, and the flu is just as infective, yada, yada, yada. I mean, I think the comfort that it comes from wearing a mask gives other people comfort, and it helps just to be obedient. It does slow down the spread. There's, you can find science that says masks aren't very effective, and you can find science where it says it is effective, a lot of it. And I think that people here, there's still people who go to parties. There's still people who don't wear masks. From what I see, because I only go to shop, is that most people wear masks. Some of them dangle their nose out from their mask like they shouldn't, which is, you shouldn't do that. But no, people generally started ramping up slowly here in the States. And I'd be a little exasperated why some people just didn't care. And it was really frustrating. Still, it's frustrating. But now more and more people are wearing masks, and I can go to the store and, they've got mandatory rules, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, I'm really excited because in Utah, there's a population of about 3.3 million, and we've got about, 500,000 doses so far, and people vaccinated. Of course, there's 2 doses, right? But it's slowly ramping up. And the more and more we get people vaccinated, and the more and more people who've been infected and who have healed, you get that herd immunity, and it's just a lot less stress because I'll probably get vaccinated in 3-4 months, and it'll be a good thing. But yeah, COVID-19, you also before had asked about my work. That's why I took a full-time job, is because COVID-19, my lead flow wasn't as good. I had some projects, and then things just dried up, and I've learned my lesson, sort of, but I know more about finding clients, how to reach out and whatnot. But that's why I'm working, is because just the work dried up. And now, as soon as I had work and work's been good and got my feet wet, then I started getting more side work. But I'm happy where I'm at. I think I'll stay with money for a good while.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of Lean Pub authors are people who've kind of either been independent their whole careers or chose to go independent at some point. There seems to be some connection often between writing and self-publishing books and just being someone who naturally gravitates towards, being freelancer on their own. Mm-hmm. And particularly at the beginning, 1 or 2 people were very concerned about how it was going to affect them over the course of the year, particularly people who were a big part of their revenue stream was being invited to give talks by companies or doing on-site consulting and things like that. And so there's a lot of people who have been negatively affected by that. And then, there are other people who are maybe in other parts of the industry who are like, wow, I've got more work than ever, and it just kind of depends on your situation. For example, I'm thinking specifically about someone who works in actually in book publishing, and he's a consultant, and so all of a sudden people are reading more, and so people see it. So it can kind of depend where you're in.
I've got a friend, Spencer Bean. Hi, Spencer, who runs a puzzle company. He does custom puzzles, and his business boomed because people are at home wanting things to do. And so his business actually took up his Stitch People business as well. He and his wife wrote a book on cross stitch patterns, which has just been phenomenal, like super successful. And, I've got my Imposter Syndrome book. I've sold my freelance college course and made some money that way on the side. But most of my income has either been, early on W-2 work, so full-time work, or basically trading time for money through consulting. So this is my first passive income stream, and I love it. I love waking up and getting a little email in my inbox saying, your Imposter Syndrome book sold for, $5 or $10 or whatnot. And I just love it. I mean, this sounds crazy, totally crazy, right? But I had a chance to take on a Shopify project. This is last week. Lead came in, a referral lead. Usually those ones convert at a really, really high rate. Like we're talking 90%, 95%, because it comes from somebody who they trust. And it was for a $15,000 project. And I'm pretty busy these days with my full-time work, but also because my side hustle, I'm working on that $7,000 project that's due on Monday. I've got another $11,000 project that's due next month, and I just didn't have time for it. And so I turned down a $15,000 project, and I could have, scheduled things out by a month or something and try to work on the side. I want to work on my own stuff. And this sounds so crazy to me now, but I get way more joy out of a $5 email or a $10 email that I sold a book than doing another $5,000 or $10,000 client project. And it's so weird to me. Like, I'm more excited about that little teeny bit. I'm more excited about, starting my blacksmithing hobby, which I have a forge ready to be built in my garage and picking up a burner tomorrow. And those things excite me. And so having been a person who has just kind of coasted for a lot of my life, I've got things done. I've had some really good success. For me, it's coasting, right? The perfectionist Steven says he's coasting. But I want to start having more meaning, more purpose, more progress, more things that give me joy. And writing gives me joy. Building things with my hand and working in the forge and having that propane roar, that gives me joy. And so it's nice to have these side hustle things because I can, we're getting new rooms for the kids, new bedroom for a room, a new bed for a bedroom. But yeah, I want to have more joy in life.
Speaking of writing, moving on to the next part of the interview, you've written a book called Imposter Therapy: How to Overcome Imposter Syndrome and Start Living. It's got a great cover, for example. I just wanted to mention that. But it's a really well-written book. And I wanted to start talking about it by just asking you, how would you go about defining imposter syndrome if someone were just asking you about it over dinner?
So I would define imposter syndrome a little deeper. I think that imposter syndrome actually has two different categories. Some people will think about imposter syndrome as a feeling where that you don't deserve the success that you have. So the accomplishments, the awards, the adulations, all these sort of the praise that you don't deserve it, that you don't deserve to be there, you don't belong here, that your fraud, they're going to find you out. And that's kind of the common dictionary definition, that you feel like you don't deserve the rewards that you have. And I also think that imposter syndrome is, and that's kind of like the super successful, the person who's actually achieved things, they feel that way. I believe there's also the newbie, the noob, the beginner, the person who just starts the job, the person who just goes to college, the person who's just trying to pick up a new hobby, the person who's just starting something. Those people often will say the word imposter syndrome, that what am I doing? Can I do this? Can I learn this? Am I good enough to learn this? Especially with a job, like, do I belong to, do I deserve to be here? Do I belong? Look at that person. They're so smart. That kind of a new mentality of, do I even have the right to have my presence here? And so when I think of imposter syndrome, I think of that, both for the beginner and for the accomplished pro.
There's a really interesting story. There are a number of interesting stories in your book, but there's one in particular involving Neil Gaiman and Neil Armstrong that I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with people, just to get a sense of, how the type of person that can get imposter syndrome can actually be like profoundly accomplished and celebrated.
So there was a story where Neil Gaiman, he's an accomplished author and writer. He was at this gala, this presentation for people who've done amazing things. And he's sitting at the back thinking, like, I'm just a writer. What do I, here's this person is curing cancer, and this person is doing genome sequencing, and this person is doing this fantastic math thing or whatnot, and feeling just this heavy imposter syndrome. And so he's just in the back. You can just picture a guy to kind of lean back in his chair thinking, like, what am I doing here? And he starts chatting with this really nice and kind elderly gentleman who basically felt the same kind of thing. It's like, what am I supposed to be doing here? It turns out that person was Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. And Neil Armstrong says, like, why am I here? I just went where I was sent. They said to go to the moon. I went to the moon. This person is doing way more amazing things than I have. And so Neil Gaiman basically says, if Neil Armstrong can have imposter syndrome, like, I suppose that's okay for me too. And that's the thing in the book, where I've got tons of examples. I actually started writing this book with a developer mindset, and then also just wanted to switch to a more general approach for imposter syndrome because I didn't want to single people out. But I find that actors and both developers have both. They have, actors and developers have both written a lot about imposter syndrome. You think about Tom Hanks and Natalie Portman, and you also think of other developers like Scott Hanselman or Brendan Dunn or John Sonmez. Like, there's a whole lot of people who've written about imposter syndrome. And that's the first thing I teach in the book, really, is that you aren't alone. That so often we get in this mental state where we think with these internal fears of, I'm alone, no one else feels this way, I feel like this, I'm so fearful, all these internal feelings. And if you don't express those, if you don't connect with other people, then you're never going to know how they feel. There was a story where in my book where after I get laid off at that startup, and other people were getting laid off too, but I was the first to go because it was, first in, first out, right? But I'd worked there for a few months. And I was talking to a friend there and said, I don't really know what I want to do with my life. And he's like, Steven, join the club. And I thought this guy, Jason, had everything figured out. He was smart. He was, the girls liked him. He was just doing well. He was super skillful. And I thought that skill and technical aptitude equaled direction, purpose, meaning. And I was dead wrong. And so before I talked to him, I thought I'm the only person. And the more and more I research, most of us feel this way, that if you don't have imposter syndrome, great, good for you. But it's those people who either overcome it or they have some pretty good mental health, or some people are delusional. They don't think they have a problem, but yeah, most people do.
And what is it about software development, do you think, that makes imposter syndrome particularly common amongst those people?
So imagine this, you get into a field, you don't know what you're writing, like you try and pick up bash programming, right? It's been around for years, decades. It should be easy to pick up. But then you start forgetting to put the space between the equal sign when declaring a variable, or you try and do a if statement and it's just different than everything you've seen. But programming is literally failing your way to success. You basically start with something and you break it so badly and you keep breaking it and making mistakes. You make it a little better. And then finally, eventually at the end, you've got it working the way you want. And that is so stressful and so heart-wrenching sometimes for somebody, especially who's new, or even if you're experienced, because we've all been there. A misplaced semicolon, some, Python, some padding issue where something was off by a certain tab. And I think it's so common in tech because there's all that weight. We're building systems sometimes where people's livelihood depends on it. We're building code where we won't know it's going to work until the very end. You've got to look up things on Google or Stack Overflow. And each time you do, you think, am I a fraud? Am I fake? Like, I should know this stuff already. And well, yeah, you can figure it out, but what's the point of wasting all that time trying to figure out one original solution where you could look on Stack Overflow, find something remotely close to what you need, make sure it's best practice, good syntax, and then go for it. But I think it's super common in tech, really, really common. And the people who listen to this, they think that they're the only one, or they're the only person who struggles or has to look up on Stack Overflow. You're not alone. We all do it.
And in the book, you set out 3 steps that one can follow to try and overcome imposter syndrome, which are reach out, reach in, and reach forward. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about each one briefly, just so we get a sense of what the steps are.
Absolutely. So I wouldn't even call these steps, but more of a section. When you have reach, so there's, again, like you said, reach in, reach out, reach in, and then reach forward. So when you want to reach out, it's because even though you have an internal problem, the solution really is external. It's connecting with others, finding out that you're not alone, and also having a better perception. So there's an analogy that I found where if you're a ship, say you're an old time ship captain sailing on a ship, you've got the sails, the rigging, you're standing on the deck and you're trying to find the new land, and you look out as hard as you can and you still can't see land. But all of a sudden, the crew member up in the crow's nest says, "Land ho!" And they can see it. You're like, whoa, you look, you squint your eyes, you get your telescope, and you still can't see it. And life and imposter syndrome is just like that. And it's not that there's a problem with the captain's vision, or he's not looking hard enough, or he's doing things the wrong way. There is a mathematical way of physics, like just with trigonometry and line of sight, that the person on a crow's nest can actually see about, for an average sailing ship, we're talking 12 miles. What is that in Canadian, right? We're talking 17, 18 clicks. But, 12 miles away, and it just has to do with the physics. It's his position. And so there's nothing wrong with the captain. There's nothing wrong with how he's trying to look. He literally just can't see it from his position. And when you have imposter syndrome, you need to connect with others because they can see things you can't. There was my wife, this is funny. She had a Microsoft Excel issue, and we was like, no, a couple stories with this. One's a Microsoft Excel issue where it was super simple. We just had to concatenate 2 cells together, change some color, change some headings, just some real simple formatting stuff. And so I just whipped it up, helped her. It took me 3 or 4 minutes. And she says, you're a wizard. And here I'm thinking, like, that's nothing. Like, that's Excel. That's past stuff. I rarely use Excel anyway, right? It's not even real coding. And or you go see your grandma and she says the internet doesn't work. So you go and you unplug it and it works once you plug it back in, right? And then she thinks you're a hero and you're the Greek god of tech, Techonesis or something that she calls you. And to you're like, I unplugged a router. And it just depends on your perception, So that's what you have to ask people. How am I doing? Do you feel this way? I feel this way. Have you ever felt this way? I feel alone. I feel scared. And if you can find someone that you can trust and connect to, they're going to help put you straight and say, no, you're actually a really good person. I remember feeling fearful when I joined a company, and one of the coworkers like, I'm so glad you joined. You've done this and this and this. You were absolutely the right hire. And inside I'm thinking like, are you sure? Thinking that there's always somebody better, right? A better hire, a better candidate. And you've got to connect. And that's where you can actually have if you can't even connect with friends, you can also read about it. They say have a coach or a mentor in life, right? Well, you can also have virtual mentors where you're reading up, you're reading people's stories they have written. Because when you read up on Neil Gaiman meeting Neil Armstrong, right, at a gala, or you read up on Brendan Dunn talking about his imposter syndrome, I've got my book, I think list-wise, let me find it here. You've got John Somers, Natalie Portman. Let's go through a list real quick. People who have actually written actors. So Tom Hanks, Emma Watson, she says when she gets recognition, she feels incredibly uncomfortable. Tom Hanks saying, when are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and take everything away? Robert Downey Jr. was really fearful about being Charlie Chaplin. And you've got like Daniel Radcliffe saying that, am I doing the right thing? Is this what I'm meant to be doing? Don Cheadle saying, all I can see is everything I'm doing wrong. That is a sham and a fraud. And Sigourney Weaver, this is an awesome one, the last actor. Have I ever doubted myself? Have I ever not? I feel self-doubt whether I'm doing something hard or easy. And that's actors, just a snippet of people who have suffered through imposter syndrome. And I've got a whole list of developers, people who have worked for GitHub, Microsoft, Braintree. I've read my story in there as well about imposter syndrome. And yeah, you've got to be able to reach out and connect, because then you can find out that you're not alone and you get that right perspective of your life. So that's the first section is reach out.
And the second section is reaching in, which is about overcoming fear and finding peace. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about how you recommend people go about trying to find that.
So with the next section of reaching in, once you've reached out and you have that instant win, that low hanging fruit of finding out, oh, I talked to so-and-so, I'm not a fraud. And, oh, they felt the same way I do, then you can reach in and deal with your internal emotions. So this is where you actually want to dig in deep and you want to find ways to overcome fear. Because here's the thing with fear. Fear is like this smoke screen, this little, nebulous cloud, this ether that it looks really scary. But once you get close to it, it still doesn't hurt you. You inspect it, you look at it, it doesn't hurt you, and you can become an observer. I didn't talk about this in the book, but there's a way of picturing, your fears inside you. And then, there's people, the Buddhists might call it transcendence, where you try and transcend. Other people would say it's like an observer state where you want to look and see and view your fears as the observer. And to do this, there's tools such as breath control. The Navy SEALs, they'll use something called box breathing. And, a couple things. First, when you breathe, you want to put your hand on your belly. Make sure you're using your diaphragm to breathe. And your belly should be going in and out. And then as you do it, you can just be mindful of that. And just when you're breathing in, breathing out, and then you can do box breathing. And this is really helpful when you've got a meeting coming up or a podcast that you're being on or being interviewed. You can breathe before. And box breathing is simply this. You breathe in for, say, 4 seconds. You hold for 4 seconds. You breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you hold for 4 seconds. And yeah, you definitely hold the emptiness at the end, because it helps you become more comfortable with discomfort. And that's what fear is. And through breath control, just doing that again and again and again. And, if you're in a stressful situation, you can drop the hold. So if you're in a fight or if you're trying to speak to somebody, you can just breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. In 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. And you can slow that down and stretch it out. I've been able to breathe 8 seconds on each side, 10 seconds. So it's 10 seconds in, 10 seconds hold, 10 seconds out, 10 seconds hold, and keep going. And it really helps. It's how the Navy SEALs get ready for combat, how they recover from combat, how they can actually shoot between heartbeats and get their heart rate down like 60 beats per minute. And that's the first part of reaching in, is breath control. Then you've got things such as meditation and mindfulness. I mean, I use calm.com, and I bought the Lifetime app. And I don't get any kickback or anything for this. I just love Tamara Levitt and her meditations. And
it's interesting, sorry to interrupt, but you reminded me of a really great story I heard of Bill Hader, the comedian. He was probably on Seth Meyers or something like that. And he was talking about how he's just got terrible, basically stage fright and fear and performance anxiety. And then they joked, of course, so you took the hardest job in television, which is Saturday Night Live. But anyway, but he said, if I recall correctly, whenever the anxiety comes, or the fear, he imagines that this cute little monster appeared sitting on his shoulder, and he's like, oh, you again. You can't hurt me, but there you are, and you're not going away. And he just uses this technique to kind of get through it.
Yeah, and whatever technique you want to use. For me, I'll picture a box. I'll picture this transparent, plexiglass box, and I'll put my inner fears. For me, it's this sounds so crazy and weird, but it's like this snake kind of object where it's got this kind of murky, dark, black mass cloud, and I'll picture it going in the box, and I can just observe it and be observer of my fears. And Will Smith says everything that you want is on the other side of fear. I believe he's quoting Jack Canfield on that one. But having fear in life, fear is okay. It's okay to be scared. It's your natural brain saying, oh no, I'm scared. Oh, I'm in danger. But just because you're in danger doesn't mean you have to be scared. There's that horrible movie After Earth with Will Smith. I love Will Smith, by the way. He's great. He talks about how don't misunderstand about how fear is real. Danger is real, but fear is a choice. And I think in life we come across so much fear about asking for my case, a girl out on a date. Fear about buying a house, fear about taking a new job, fear about, am I doing this right? Fear about, will I keep my job during the pandemic? Fear about, all these sort of things. Am I raising my kids right? And that's just your brain doing what your brain's supposed to do, is trying to pick out threats and issues and say, am I okay? Am I safe? Am I safe? And so you can just sit with your fear. Just sit with it and be okay with, because as you investigate it, and this is where writing things down with the pen and paper is really helpful, because when you say, well, why am I scared? I'm so scared about losing my job. Well, why? Because I don't have a lot of savings. Why? Because I don't know how to save. Why? Because nobody taught me. Why? Because I never asked. You can go down to the root of the cause and find the source. There's always a solution. There's always a solution. And the solution with fear is to get close to fear. Embrace it, hug it, look at it, inspect it, get deep, and find out, why are you scared? And this is a scary thing, but it's a better way, because here's a secret that a lot of people don't know about fear. You know what a flywheel is, right? You see those in turbines or whatnot. A flywheel is this energy storage device, and it's always rotating. And I believe that, inside us, we have these feelings that keep coming up. And so, I guess let's be honest. Here's the story of my upbringing, origin story, where I was dating a girl for a year, and I was engaged for a year. And then on our wedding day at the Salt Lake Temple, here's the secret process of how things work when you're a Latter-day Saint, right? How they get married in the temple is you show up in your normal church clothes, you go down, you dress in white, and then you go into a waiting room. I'm not going to share any secrets or anything, but you go hand in hand and you walk up to a ceiling room where, 50 seats, 40 seats, and your family's there from both sides of the family. And then you get sealed for time and an eternity. That's the belief in the LDS church. But here I am. The girl shows up and we go through the front desk. Shore recommends we go to get dressed, and I'm sitting there waiting. I'm waiting in the waiting room. And I see these couples come in, shining, beaming. They hold hands. They look at each other all, googly eyed and whatnot. And then another couple goes, another couple goes, another couple goes, another one goes. And I finally say, hey, can you find out what's going on? And they call and say, Godfrey, wedding number 19. Yeah. Can you go see President Baxter in the office? And there's my bride to be. I go upstairs, take off the white clothes, just simple clothing. And she's bawling, she's crying. And that is my getting dumped at the altar story. And it turned out that, we all had our own issues. There was a lot of baggage and whatnot. She wasn't as honest as she could be. I should have been more courageous than I was. So there's definitely a fault on both sides. But that rocked me to my core. And so that means failing school for a few semesters, going back to Fort McMurray, making a lot of money, doing trucking, and going back to school. And so I think a lot of us, we need self-compassion, because life will just kick you in the groin and kick you and beat you down if you let it. Life is beautiful and amazing, and I'm so grateful to be alive. But we all have hard things that we go through. Most of them we cause ourselves.
Thanks very much for sharing that. That reminds me of, I think it's in your book, or it may have been somewhere else, where I read you talking about one technique you can use for analyzing your fear is thinking about what's the worst case scenario. Well, and I guess very unfortunately in that particular circumstance, that was pretty much the worst thing you could imagine happening.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, looking back, this is one of the best things that could happen to me, but when it happened, it was really hard. And so that's why I talk about the flywheel and bringing things up, because your emotions, your past are going to keep coming up. Your fears are going to keep coming up. They're going to go around. They might, 3 months, 6 months, a year, but they're always going to come. And so unless you deal with your fears, unless you find ways to actually approach your fears and sit with it and analyze it and asking like, why am I scared of this? Again, what is the worst going to happen? But digging into those fears, you're always going to have that come up. And this isn't a threat or anything. It's just the way life is and the way that we're built. So, but yeah, with fear, looking from the point of view of what's the worst that can happen? Why do I feel this way? Just get deep, get close with your fears. And if you do that, you'll find that there's nothing to really be scared of, because you can break it down and then you can find out why are you really scared? What's the root cause? And then you can solve it.
And the final section is reach forward. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yep. So reaching forward is, in my belief, I don't think that we're sent here in this life to just survive and get through. I think that we need to thrive. There's a philosophy in the ancient Stoics. So the Stoics, they were, in ancient Greece, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and they believed that you should have eudaimonia, which is a Greek word that literally means, there's a lot of, living well or whatnot. I think the best translation is human flourishing. So you think about a garden, right? The snow patrol, right? A garden that's bursting into life, where you've got vines and overflow and everything's growing in abundance of life. And too many of us are just surviving. We're just getting through. We're just trying to make it through life, and that's okay. But I think the goal is to thrive, is to progress and really to flourish in life. And so I go through two frameworks, one for the beginner and imposter syndrome who feels they can't learn anything, I'm not good enough to be here. And that's a framework of learning anything you want to learn, leveraging the 10,000 hour rule, science and the new expertise, and, using grit and basically dedicated practice and learning anything you want. And the second part is stoicism, where we do real life applications of how stoicism can work. If you feel like a fraud, there's quotes where like Epictetus will say that, you would be, let me see if I can find it here, but you would be offended if somebody gave your stuff away to anybody who's walking by. Yet, you so easily will give your mind away and your thoughts away, and have you no shame on that. Or how Marcus Aurelius will talk about how, even the ant and the bee and the miser, they do what their nature demands. Your human nature, right? And so as you lay there in bed thinking, oh, this is nice. Were you born to feel nice? Were you born to lay there in your warm sheets? This is me paraphrasing, of course, but how we need to get up and do as our nature demands. And so I basically take imposter syndrome and take this thousands and thousand-year-old framework of stoicism, and it still applies and it still works, because stoicism is all about living a life of courage, of managing emotions. You think of a stoic, like Spock in Star Trek, the people who created that character. I mean, Spock's awesome, right? Live long and prosper. He's great. But his character was taken erroneously from what people thought stoics were, where you don't have emotion. It's fine to have emotions. It's fine to have fear. It's fine to feel scared, but you need to manage that fear. You need to be in control of that fear. And so if you think you can't control fear, well, think about the soldiers who stand on the front line and see the whites of the enemy eyes and they still hold firm. You think about the CEO who has to make payroll and he still makes it, or puts his house on the line and he's still there. You think about fear. You think about a mother going to give childbirth, because this day and age it's still dangerous, and how you can still be present and you can still stand strong even though you're scared.
One thing that nature demands is that all things must come to an end. And so I think it's probably good for us now to move on to the last part of the interview, where we talk about your process as an author, writing the book. I guess my first question there would be, why did you choose LeanPub as a platform to publish your book?
Well, I didn't choose LeanPub as a platform to publish my book, but it was expediency. So I written my book originally in Google Drive and Google Sheets, actually, and it was pretty good. I wanted to find a publisher an editor, because I wanted to have a better reader experience. I'd gone through and done four drafts of just revising, cleaning things up. And it was all in Google and Google Sheets. And I said, hey, to a publisher, how do you want this? It's like, well, we actually do Microsoft Word, which there's this whole in writing, Microsoft Word is king, which I don't understand why. Yes, Microsoft is fine, but just the whole process of formatting is such a beast, and it's a hassle, and trying to get different versions. It wasn't enjoyable. And so I took my Google Sheets, exported it as a Microsoft Word, sent it to my publisher. She turned on track changes, made her changes, and I accepted, all of them. But I found that after that, I could export Microsoft Word as a PDF, but it wasn't. What about Mobi? What about EPUB? What about PDF? What about web versions? Any of those? And so I found LeanPub. I'm like, okay, let's redo this. So once I got the edited book back, I took every single word, copy paste, manual formatting, typesetting, everything in LeanPub. And it was a really good experience. And I love that I can actually export, make a change and export different versions and whatnot. And I posted the book on Smashwords, which it really hasn't sold well at all on Smashwords. I don't know if authors get, if they advertise and sell better there, but I have had really good experience with selling through LeanPub. And so most of my sales have come through word of mouth, posting, friends, mentoring people on freelancing. People find out that I wrote a book, they want to buy it. And so it's been, I don't know, do we talk about numbers but you first want the writing process, right? So that was really it. Just putting things in LeanPub. And so the next book I write will be written just in LeanPub. And I don't know how to find an editor who can work with Git and work with LeanPub, but I'm sure I can find somebody who knows English and like an English major who knows Git.
Thanks very much for sharing all those details. That's gold to people who are getting started or who have sort of running into roadblocks, to hear, the experiences that other people had and how they made it through. I would say in particular, like whenever I have to turn on Microsoft Word, it makes me cry. It is such a terrible, we don't normally complain about other people's products here, and who am I to complain about Microsoft Word, right? But
it has a place, right?
It's terrible for writing, and it's really unfortunate for the writing world that Microsoft Word is still the default thing. I mean, I wrote a doctoral thesis. It had no images in it. It was only about, 300 or 400 pages long. And when I wanted to take it to the printer, I had to even when I was writing it, I had to split it into 8 different files because it couldn't handle anything more than 50 pages. Otherwise, you just got the spinner all the time and stuff like that. And so what I mean is not just visually or with all kinds of other features, that basically using Microsoft Word to write an ordinary book. To write the manuscript for an ordinary book is like getting a fighter jet to go to the corner store. When you're writing a normal book, it's got chapter headings and then paragraphs and a table of contents and maybe an index, and to use something with mail merge in it, to do anyway. Yeah. It's anyway, that's my bleepity bleep Microsoft Word rant.
Well, that's why I love LeanPub, because it puts the image in at the start of we'll just say for the PDF case, right? Because, EPUB, I think EPUB has it, but, Mobi, you upload your own image, but it comes with the front matter. It comes with the copyrights. It comes with table contents generation. And so writing a book in Markdown, Markdown's super, super simple to pick up, even for a non-coder. And so I would suggest writing your next book in Markdown in LeanPub, because I that's, even Smashwords, they all recommend that Microsoft Word is the way to go. And they only have it where if you write in Word, then you can have the different formats to export, where, I've never used, is it Scrivener? How would you say that?
Scrivener, that's
the one, Scrivener. And there's other ones that you can use for writing, but yeah, Leanpub's really, really good for publishing. Yeah, I'm really happy with it.
It's interesting, actually, just to talk a little bit about that. I actually interviewed the founder and CEO of Smashwords on the podcast once. So I just want to say that much love to Smashwords. And I know you weren't casting aspersions either. Nope. But so I go on complaining about Microsoft Word to a lot of people, like to people like you and me. Maybe we hear about a markup syntax called Markdown, and we're like, oh yeah, let's check it out. A lot of people, they hear all those words and they're like, what the hell are you talking about? I don't want to learn anything. I know how to. It's yeah, sure, it's clunky, but I know how to use Microsoft Word, and I don't want to become a programmer, and I don't want to do all that. And so
that's the thing.
People in that world, using Microsoft Word is just like, even though from like my perspective, you're actually causing yourself a lot of pain by not just learning this other thing that'll take you 10 minutes to learn now. But I understand it completely psychologically that like, you're just like, that's not me. That's not the kind of thing I do. Just give me Word. I know how it works.
And that's okay if they want to do that. Microsoft Word, it has its place. It does really well in academia and the publishing world. That's what a lot of people use. And so great. If that's what you're comfortable with, go for it. I just want people to be more aware that there is a better way. And I don't think Microsoft is the future. And I'm not going to rant on Microsoft. I think that every nation that has been, the sun never set on the British Empire, and how great, the United States arguably has been power-wise in the world. And there was Spain before England. And then you had, all these countries who have just, the Vikings, right? And I just think Microsoft will have its day where eventually it will just kind of go away. They don't, in my opinion, build as good products. And so not to rant, I just want people to know that there's a better way of doing it. If you can, spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes learning Markdown. Just literally, you want to do a header, you put a pound sign and a space for header 1, second level header, 2 pound signs in the space. You want an unordered list, bullet points, you put a star or a dash in the space. It's really super easy, and it's going to save you all this, 5 minutes, 10 minutes you might even take to write in Markdown. It's going to save you hours of formatting, if not, hours or days of tweaking and changing things, because I just make a tweak in Leanpub and then I re-export a new version, and then that's it. I can upload that to AWS. Amazon. You can tell I work in tech when I think Amazon is AWS, not Amazon.com. But Leanpub is, I think, a forward future way of writing, and I hope people will find a better way to write.
And regarding sales, so it sounds like you're doing something that we typically recommend that authors do, which is try out a bunch of different platforms. Just to be clear about that, if you can use Leanpub to write your book and produce the ebook formats, but you don't actually need to publish it on Leanpub. That's not like a requirement that we have or anything like that. And so you've been doing different platforms.
Yeah. So I basically wrote that book in Microsoft Word, exported it as a PDF, and then I put it in through the Kindle Create and to put that on as Amazon. I really need to go through and take the latest version because I've tweaked the typesetting and the formatting on Amazon. But you know how Amazon works. If you sell a book on there, you'll be in like the latest releases, and then unless you mark it specifically to Amazon, you just kind of drop off the face of the planet because there's so many ebooks. And so my Leanpub's done pretty well. We can talk numbers. I think I've sold $160 in royalties, which isn't huge, but for me, for a book that's been released as of I'd say the start of this year, January 1st, through just kind of passive word of mouth, I'm happy with that. I haven't done any marketing funnels. I haven't done any, launches with an email list or anything like that. And so it's just this small little passive thing where, every third morning they get a little email saying I got a book sold for $9 or $5. And it's just something where I can say, I did it. I wrote it. I'm going to write more. And that's the thing with writing a book. You write one book and then you might get some exposure from that, but you write 2 books, you get way more exposure. You write 3, you get more exposure, more sales. And when they, buy book 3, they think that's pretty good. I want to buy book 1 and 2. And that's just how readers work. And so this first book is literally a foot in the door of my future of writing on the side, and it gives me meaning and joy. And so if I can make a little bit of money, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I don't know if you've done any reading in the self-publishing kind of blogosphere, but you've just exactly described the process that the most sophisticated self-publishing authors use and recommend to people, which is like, remember that your first book is your first book. And, it will still be there when you've finished your third or fourth. Yep. And particularly with genre fiction, people often make their first book completely free. And then there's all kinds of things you can do with special offers and stuff like that, particularly on Amazon, to get yourself boosted up the lists and things like that. And so what was Eric Ries's my 5 readers or something like that, famous post, you've got to start somewhere, and keeping in mind that you're at the beginning of a journey, and where you're going to be 10 years later is
there is a quote, or basically, I wouldn't quote anybody, but trust the process, trust the process, that if you keep writing, you keep producing, you keep churning things out, then eventually you'll find your success, whatever that means. But a lot of us, they think, I wrote a book, I need to make money off this. I mean, that's why with writers, yes, there's always those rare people who can self-publish, or they get this amazing book deal, but those people are rare. And for most of us, it's those people who've written 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 books. I know people who, one girl, I won't share her names, but she makes $100,000 a year doing romance books. A couple of her friends were talking where they make a couple hundred, if not close to $1 million in sci-fi books. Brandon Sanderson, who I've met and shook hands and talked to, he's awesome. He gave me a bit of advice saying, keep writing. Like literally that was it. So hard to sit behind him in a seminar, by the way, where he's just right in front of me and just thinking, that's Brandon Sanderson. I've read all his books. He's amazing. I'm a new writer. I have imposter syndrome. Like really hard to focus on the seminar when you're right behind Brandon Sanderson. But just trust the process. Trust that it's going to work out. Trust that if you keep working, you keep writing, you get to your 3 or 5 or 6 drafts, whatever it takes for that particular book. You send it off to an editor. If you need to, you pay for it, you get it done, and you publish, and then you write the next book, and then you publish, and then you write the next book. And eventually you get to a point where people are reading your stuff, you're finding out that they like your stuff, and then you can start really promoting your work and finding joy and meaning through helping people and getting your work out. So I don't even want to really set up funnels for my Imposter Syndrome book yet, because I'd rather write, because it's just that compound effect by having more books. I almost wonder is it really worth it to push my Imposter Syndrome book why not spend my time writing 2 or 3 or 4 more books and then start to push the marketing and just trust that it'll all work out.
The last question I always like to ask in the podcast, if the guest is a Lean Pub author, is if there was one thing we could fix for you that really bugs you, or if there was one feature we could create for you, can you think of anything you would ask us to do?
Oh, I already know. As soon as you said this question, like, oh my friggin' goodness, I want you to fix this. So if you make one little mistake with your with the footnotes, if you have one little spacing off, so say in Markdown, footnotes are a pain in any system, right? But Markdown, you get the square bracket with the caret sign in front, then your number, and then your colon, and then you have to have a space. If you don't have that space there, it doesn't work, and it just shows up as just this kind of gibberish on your page. That would take a look into that. Maybe the highlighting when doing your typesetting, trying to say this is an error. I'd say error highlighting is a better thing to have, because that one there's gotchas. Like I need to have processes with writing a book. I need to search for a double star or a double pound sign or something because I've missed a space. Yeah, but besides that, it's pretty slick.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. We've had people ask for, better error reporting. And actually, error highlighting is I've not heard that idea before. That's a really interesting idea. And yeah, I'll note that for the team. Working on error reporting is kind of like a medium-term thing that we're going to be taking very seriously, because, for example, if you we're extolling the virtues of writing in Markdown, right? But if there are things like where if you're trying to insert an image and you type the wrong file name or something like that, then when you create a preview, you'll just get a little exclamation point triangle going, there's no image here. And, probably the best one of the best things we could do in that is actually have when you create a preview or publish a version, have a little error log, which will hopefully be empty all the time or something like that. But, actually show the file and the line where the issue is would really help people a lot. So yeah, thanks very much for that suggestion. That's along the lines of something that authors have asked for before and that we know is very important. And yeah, error highlighting in particular is a really good idea.
But I'll be honest, the writing process on LeanPub is super slick. I wish there was a way to have the distraction-free mode, either turn that on or off, because when writing, you want distraction-free, right, going through. But when actually going back and forth, pasting, copy, paste, if you click in, then it has a little blur on the side where it gets rid of the sidebar. It's nice to have the interface where it doesn't hide and show automatically, where you can choose to hide or show it, or have at least the option saying, I want to turn it off, turn it on, because when doing typesetting, it's such a pain to go back and forth. But no, I love LeanPub. I really do. I mean, without getting paid for it, I think it's a really great writing process. And I think most authors should use something like LeanPub. I think that Markdown has its small limitation, like, tables, right? Really easy to create a table in Microsoft Word. Markdown, I would suggest that writers, when they do it, to use a table generator, like outside LeanPub, and just do a Markdown table generator, because trying to write them by hand and get the right, pipes and the right hyphens and everything, that's just a pain. Use a free table generator and then paste the text in. But no, Markdown's the future, I think.
Well, thanks very much for your suggestions and for a really great interview and for using LeanPub as a platform to write and publish your book. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks, Len.
Thanks a lot. And as always, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Front Matter Podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate and review it wherever you found it. And if you'd like to be a LeanPub author yourself, please check out our website at leanpub.com. Thanks.